Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. This video is in response to the Radical Home Goddess. She did a video entitled LA and New Possibilities, talk about separation, my response. So in this video, I'm going to outline my position on Black separatism. I'm going to raise several concerns and several criticisms of this ideology. And before I do so, I must address something that the Radical Home Goddess said about the civil rights movement and Thurgood Marshall. She described the civil rights movement as a crock. She also described it as black people fighting so that they could sit on the toilet next to white people. And she went on to describe Justice Thurgood Marshall as a shill, basically dismissing him as an agent. So I want to respond to these things before I go into the substance of my criticism of Black separatism. And I'll start out by quoting something that H. Rap Brown said. And for those of you who don't know, H. Rap Brown was one of the members of SNCC. He's known as a Black Power advocate. He is a political prisoner today. He is a man who has fought for our liberation in this country. So I'm going to read his assessment of the civil rights movement and what he had to say about this notion, because this is a similar criticism that has been raised before. Here's what he said. But what they didn't understand was that none of us were concerned about sitting down next to the white man and eating a hamburger. And he goes on to talk about how that's a white supremacist attitude in terms of that kind of perspective towards the civil rights movement. He says that integration was never our concern. And then he goes on to say this. He says, the civil rights movement was concerned with controlling the animalistic behavior of white people. I resented someone telling me I couldn't eat at a certain place. It wasn't that I wanted to eat there. Hell no. I always knew that we had the best food. And then he goes on to say, we weren't fighting for integration. We were letting white folks know that they can no longer legislate where we went or what we did. So that dispels this notion that somehow black people were just fighting so that they could sit next to white people, so that they could eat with white people. They were fighting for their human dignity. They were fighting for freedom. They were fighting so that they would not be subjugated and regulated and oppressed by this white man. Even you acknowledge that there's a difference between separation and segregation. Segregation is oppression. And that's what the civil rights workers were fighting against. They were fighting so that we could be treated as equal human beings. They were fighting so that we could have freedom, so that we would not have to see signs saying no colors allowed, so that we could go where we want, so that we could have basic rights like the right to vote, the right to get a decent education, the right to not be segregated and humiliated, the right to go to a store, to go to a hotel, to go to a restroom, to go anywhere we choose to go freely. That's basic human rights. That's basic human dignity. And that's what they were fighting for. And I think that it is disrespectful. I think that it shows ingratitude. I just think that it is just ridiculous to characterize the civil rights movement as a crock and to talk about how people were simply fighting so that they could sit next to the white man on the toilet. No, that wasn't what they were fighting for. They were fighting for respect. They were fighting for dignity. They were fighting for their basic humanity. And even you acknowledge that there's a difference between separation and segregation again. So that's one point that I had to get out. I mean, because of what our ancestors did and our elders did, We have rights today that we take for granted. And because of their work, there have been significant improvements in the plight of Black people. We have a Civil Rights Act. We have a Voting Rights Act. We have a Fair Housing Act. We have rights that we take for granted again. And then also, when you just look at some of the numbers, and I'm just going to cite education levels, I'm going to cite poverty rate, and I'm also going to deal with politics in terms of the number of Black elected officials. There's an article in the Washington Post that tracked the progress of African Americans from the civil rights era till today. And this article notes that 43 years ago, there were only 1,469 Black elected officials nationwide. But in 2011, there were 10,500 Black elected officials. That alone is a sign of progress. With Black elected officials comes Black power, comes the ability to shape our destiny through public policy. So that alone is a sign of progress that wouldn't have been possible without a civil rights movement, without a Voting Rights Act. And then you look at education. There's been significant progress as a result of the civil rights movement. In 1964, 25.7% of Blacks between ages 25 and over had completed at least 4 years of high school. Whereas recently, and this says last year, which would have been 2012, because this article was written in 2013, that percentage was at 85%. That's a substantial improvement. If you look at the percentage of African Americans that attended college in 1964, only 3.9% of African Americans attended college and completed college, compared to 21.2% in recent years in 2012. That is a substantial improvement. And that improvement would not have been possible if it wasn't for a Civil Rights Act, if it wasn't for the Civil Rights Movement. That wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for Brown versus the Board of Education, which legalized segregation in education. If it wasn't for that decision, that improvement, that progress would not have been possible. If it wasn't for affirmative action, that improvement, that progress would not have been possible. Also, when you look at poverty rates, and this is going to be the last statistic that I cite, back in 1966, the poverty rate for African Americans was 41.8%. That's damn near half of African Americans living in poverty. And then it says 2 years ago, which would have been 2011, at the time this article was written, the poverty rate for African Americans was 27.6%. That's a substantial improvement. It's not enough. I mean, there's still room for improvement in our community. But let's not downplay the significance of the civil rights movement. Let's not dismiss it. Let's not disrespect our ancestors and our elders by referring to such a significant movement as a crock. And to refer to Thurgood Marshall as a shill is preposterous. I mean, this man was responsible for all kinds of civil rights legislation, litigation, civil rights litigation that improved and expanded the rights of African American people in this country. Not only that, this man served as a justice on the Supreme Court, deciding important civil rights matters that affected our lives. Issues like affirmative action, issues like voting rights, issues like criminal justice matters. So to downplay this man and brush him aside and call him a shill is preposterous, it's ridiculous, it's disrespectful, and it just doesn't take into account the substantial contribution that this man has made to the struggle for equal rights and civil rights in this country. So I had to get that out of my way before I go into the rest of this video. And also, I'll say this. I mean, the civil rights movement was not about begging white people for anything. It's not about that. People don't listen to someone who just begs. We fought tooth and nail, step by step, in the trenches so that we could have our rights. We didn't beg anybody for anything. Martin Luther King didn't beg anybody when he was marching and protesting and risking his life and his liberty so that we could be free, so that we could have basic human rights. He was not begging, he was fighting for those things. He was fighting. And all those people that sacrificed so much, they weren't begging. Those people that faced the dogs and the fire hoses and the batons and the lynchings and the shootings, they were not begging. They were fighting for freedom. And I just think that it is just utterly disrespectful to characterize what they were doing as begging. Now, let's go into this issue of separation. Let's talk about it. Now, the idea of nationhood, the idea that we are one people, that's something that I support. I support the idea of Black nationalism as a concept. And even bigger than that, and more significant, I support the idea of Pan-Africanism, that all African people are one people and they need to unite and fight together for their common interests and their common purpose and the liberation and unification of Africa. I support that. I stand behind that. But in terms of this movement towards Black separatism, I have some questions about it. I have some criticisms of it, and I'm going to outline what those criticisms are. The biggest criticism that I have about it is the fact that it is not an immediate solution to the problems that our people face right now today. People have been talking about separation forever. You have all these Black nationalist groups that have been talking about separating from America forever. And I'll just start with the example of the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam was founded in 1930. And here we are 86 years later. And they are no closer to any kind of separation from America. These people talk separation while they remain in the United States, while they remain in this country, a part of this country, reaping the benefits and the problems of America. This talk of separation is just that, it's just talk, because no one has any kind of practical plan to make it happen. No practical plan at all. None of these Black nationalists, at least right now, none of them have organized any kind of massive exodus out of this country. And none of them have any concrete plans to leave America. None of them. All they have are hopes and dreams and words written on paper on their what they believe and what they want and all that kind of stuff, or their papers on their philosophy. That's all they have. But they don't have any kind of concrete plan to make this a reality. Meanwhile, our people continue to suffer in this country. Meanwhile, we still have problems of police brutality that we have to deal with. Meanwhile, we still have problems of failing schools that we have to deal with. We still have problems of health issues in our Black community, health disparities in the Black community. We still have the issue of the massive wealth gap between black people and white people, we still have the problem of failing schools in our community. We still have the problem of mass incarceration in our communities. We still have the problems of drugs and violence in our communities. We still have the problems of broken homes in our communities. We have massive problems that need to be fixed yesterday. We cannot afford to just hope and wish for some separation decades from now while we suffer today. There is no plan for anybody to separate anytime soon. There is no real plan. All we have is rhetoric. And rhetoric does not feed people. Rhetoric does not protect people. Rhetoric does not provide for people. Rhetoric doesn't do anything for people right now. It doesn't address these current problems that I talked about right now. We need to address these current problems. And that's one of the biggest failings of this black separatism talk. It doesn't address our current condition. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of this talk is just fantasy talk. Here you have this organization, the Nation of Islam, around for 86 years talking this separation talk. But they haven't even bought like a section of land and moved onto that section of land and just lived isolated from the rest of society like the Amish have done. They haven't even taken it to that level. They haven't even taken it to the level where you have a community that's insulated from the rest of the American society. They haven't even done that. But yet, you hear this rhetoric of separation. All it is rhetoric. And we need more than rhetoric to improve our condition as a people. The next thing that I'll address is this. And that's this. I mean, people, the radical home goddess talked about how people are trying to keep African Americans in this country, essentially by tricking black people with offering them carrots and all that kind of stuff. She used the analogy of offering black people carrots to keep them here, to keep them complacent and all that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is nobody is preventing black people from separating from this country, from leaving this country. Nobody's preventing you. Nobody's saying that you can't leave this country to go live in Africa. Nobody's preventing the Nation of Islam, for instance, or any other black nationalist group from purchasing a plot of land and actually working that land and living on that land as an isolated community. Nobody's preventing anybody from doing that. So I don't get that point. And another issue with this whole separation talk is this. I mean, we live in a worldwide system of Western imperialism, a system of white supremacy worldwide, where you have these Western countries controlling and owning the resources of countries around the world, of African countries. They still subject Africa to neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism. They still control the resources of Africa. That's why many of the countries in Africa have been reduced to a third world status because of their relationship with the West. Africa is underdeveloped because of that relationship with the West, that oppressive relationship with the West, that exploitive relationship with the West. So even if black people were to go to Africa, they would still be under the system of white supremacy and imperialism. That's the bottom line. So I just think that instead of this fantasy talk, we need to take control over the land that is under our feet. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that Amiri Baraka said something to that effect. If I have the exact quote, if I'm able to find it, I'll post it in this video or provide it in the description box. But we have to take control over the land under our feet. You know, I was on a Google Hangout and my brother made some comments about how we need to control these predominantly black communities in which we live. While we talk all this fantasy talk about going to Africa or setting up some separate state within the United States in the South and all that kind of stuff, while we talk that fantasy talk, we don't deal with the realities that we face. We live in predominantly black communities, but yet we don't even control the resources in those communities. That should be our focus, controlling the communities in which we live. The community where LA lives, Benton Harbor, is 89.2% black. You don't have to go to some separate place to have a black community or like a black state in a sense. Benton Harbor is a city that black people need to have control over. They need to control the businesses in that community, as Malcolm X talked about when he described black nationalism, when he talked about how we need to control the businesses in our community, the politicians in our community, and the other institutions in our community. That needs to be our focus. Owning and controlling the spaces in which we live. Determining our own destiny in the spaces in which we live. I mean, here in Baltimore, Baltimore is 63.7% black. Instead of talking about some distant, unattainable, at least right now, not in the immediate future, goal, we need to deal with controlling the resources that are right beneath our feet. Controlling and owning the land beneath our feet. Controlling the businesses in our community. Many of these communities are governed by people. They're governed by people that are from outside of the community. They use puppet politicians, and also they control the economics of our community. That's where our fight lies. It lies in us controlling the businesses in our community and the politicians in our community and taking charge of the schools that our children attend, demanding the most from the teachers in our schools, demanding the most from the politicians to ensure that our schools have adequate funding, addressing public policies that impact things like police brutality, defending ourselves in our communities. These are the things that we need to be talking about. These are the things that we need to be dealing with. These are the everyday problems that must be addressed. That should be our focus instead of some pipe dream that's nowhere in sight. So some will say, well, how do you gain control over the land under your feet? How do you claim it as your own, as Amiri Baraka says? Well, it begins with several steps. But before I even get into that, I want to first say that there is no magic solution. There is no waving of the wand to solve all the problems in our community. Our problems will not be solved with a YouTube video. But I'll say this. We must mobilize politically. And by mobilize, I mean we must exercise our right to vote. We must support candidates that support our issues. And even more important than that, we need to create the next generation of politicians now. We need to start grooming people for politics and for public office now. Raising them up so that they can advance our agenda. And we need to hold politicians accountable. That's what we need to do. Instead of talking about a fantasy of separating from this white man when you know that there's no way in hell that we're going to separate as a mass group of people anytime soon. There is no mass exodus happening anytime soon. And even these people that advocate this know this very well. So we must mobilize our vote. And why is our vote so important? Because our life is governed by the laws that are enacted in this country, both on the local level, the state level, and the federal level. We have the power to sit on juries that decide cases like the Walter Scott case or the Trayvon Martin case. We have the power to render justice. By exercising our right to vote, we make it more likely that we'll be on these juries. And that's another thing. We have to take our jury duty seriously, because it makes no sense for an important case involving racism and police brutality to only have one black juror. That should not happen. Instead of us voicing our demands for justice on YouTube, we could actually be on the jury in these types of cases, advocating justice right then and there, making sure that justice is rendered. So that's another reason why voting is important. Also, voting is important because on the local level, the people directly elect judges to the bench. So we have the power to elect judges who are concerned about the various issues in our community, including police brutality, racial discrimination, and other vital issues. We have the power to elect the prosecutors who will prosecute cases of police brutality, who will prosecute cases involving crime in our community. We have the power to elect these people instead of just complaining about how this prosecutor and that prosecutor didn't have the courage to bring a case against a police officer for police brutality. Let's elect prosecutors who have the courage. Prosecutors like Marilyn Mosby here in Maryland, in Baltimore. We have the power to elect our city council people who can create policies, for instance, affecting housing, affecting education, affecting police brutality, creating policies like citizen review boards. We have the power to elect mayors in our community, mayors who appoint the police chiefs. These police chiefs can have the same values that we have if we exercise our power properly. We can make sure that we have police chiefs who are concerned about the issue of police brutality. Also, we have the power to elect the members of our state legislature and our federal legislature, our Congress, and our state representatives. People that have the power to enact laws to address the issue of racial profiling and police brutality. For example, we have the power to help elect a president of the United States, someone that will appoint a U.S. attorney to enforce civil rights. These elections are important, and that's one of the ways that we can claim the ground beneath our feet and claim control of our communities. We can't complain about the failing schools in our community if we are not voting for the people on the school board. These are just basic things. We can't complain about the quality of the education that our young people receive in the public schools if we are not attending the parent-teacher conferences, if we are not involved in our children's education. We can't complain. Again, we have to claim the land beneath our feet and take control over it. In the business area, in the area of business, we have the power to shut down businesses that disrespect us. businesses that treat us with utter disrespect, that disrespect our women, that talk to us all crazy. We have the power to end those businesses, to put those businesses out of business. We have the power to do that. You have these businesses in our community that have no respect for us. You have these businesses that are ran by Asians and Arabs and all these other foreign groups of people that couldn't give a damn about black people. They take our money out of town when the sun goes down, as Malcolm X talked about. That's what they do. And we allow it, and we need to stop allowing it. That's how we take control of our community. I read about a story where this Arab store owner pointed a gun at some children. So the people there, they protested against that business. They have been organizing a boycott of that business. That's the kind of stuff that we need to do to demand respect. And also, respect doesn't just deal on that basic level. If someone is in a business in the black community where they are reaping tons of money from the black community, we need to demand that those businesses give back to the black community. And if they don't give back, if they are not willing to give back by supporting various programs in the community, then we need to boycott those businesses. We should not be supporting a business that doesn't support us. We should not support a business that doesn't hire black people. We have these businesses in our community that are owned and controlled by these Arabs and Asians. And many of these businesses don't even hire black people. They only hire family members. That should not be allowed in the black community. If they want to operate in our community, they have to show us respect. They have to hire us and they have to contribute to the black community. Otherwise, they need to be shut down. They have to respect us. Otherwise, they must be shut down. That's how you gain some control. And also what we need to do is pool our resources and create our own cooperative businesses. Create our own convenience stores, our own grocery stores, our own hair supply, beauty supply stores. It doesn't make sense that the only businesses in our community that we own for the most part are these funeral homes and these barbershops and beauty salons. We need to own and control every single business in our community. And that takes a lot of work. It won't be solved with just do for self rhetoric. It is something that we need to endeavor in. It is something that we need to prepare for. We need to educate ourselves about how to conduct business. And that's one of the things that I do respect about Boyce Watkins, that he does teach about entrepreneurship. That is something that we really need to seize upon. And not only that, we need to change policy so that it is easier for African Americans to obtain loans so that they can go into business in our community. Those are the types of things that we must do in order to own and claim the land underneath our feet. So that's one point that I want to make. And then I'm going to make this other point, and that's about America and our right to be here. Our blood, sweat, and tears are in the soil of this land. We built this country. Hundreds of years of free labor built the wealth of this nation. This nation is in debt to the black man. This nation is in debt to the black woman. And we're here to collect that debt. We are here to collect it. We have fought in every single one of America's wars. From the Revolutionary War until the wars that are being waged today in Afghanistan and elsewhere. No one has sacrificed more for this country than the black man. We sacrificed at a time when we didn't even have any rights. We fought for other people's democracies while we were denied democracy in America. Our blood, sweat, and tears is in this land. We built this country. Because of our fight, because of our struggle, people are able to come here and enjoy the benefits of anti-discrimination laws because of what we did. We built this country. We made this country come closer to being a so-called more perfect union. That's what we did. We forced this country to live up to the professed ideals of democracy and human rights and all that kind of stuff because of what we did. After all that work, after all that labor, after all that sacrifice, I would be damned if I were to leave this country and allow others to benefit from the labor of our ancestors and of our elders. That would be foolish. That would be ridiculous. That would be silly. While people are talking this separatism rhetoric, you have people from Africa, people from all over the world coming to America so that they can have certain opportunities. Instead of us talking about fantasies, let's try to build and realize the opportunities that are actually available to us. And I find it odd that these people that express such hopelessness in terms of government policy and in terms of the white man meeting the demands of black people, these same people turn around and actually talk about reparations as if they think that that will actually happen. These same people that talk about how the white man is the devil and how the white man is not going to give you anything or help you in any kind of way, these same people hold out hope that this white man will actually give them some land so that they can be a free and powerful nation. The white man will never voluntarily do that. So again, my point is this: we need to deal with reality instead of fantasy. We need, in the words of Amiri Baraka, we need to look down at the ground upon which we stand and claim it as our own. That's what we need to do. Yeah, and I'll just close by saying this. I mean, there was some discussion about whether or not we are still living in slavery today or things are worse than they were during slavery. You know, as I said on the Google Hangout, I think that it is absolutely ridiculous to suggest that we are still living under the same level or even worse level of oppression than our ancestors. I think to do so is disrespectful to the ancestors who suffered under slavery. It's disrespectful to the ancestors who rest at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, who were thrown overboard and devoured by sharks. It is disrespectful to the ancestors who were crammed into the slave ships and forced to travel for days upon days across the Atlantic Ocean, who were beaten and stripped of their humanity, stripped of their languages, their culture, their religions, their very humanity, and reduced to property, reduced to chattel property, beaten, raped, lynched, castrated, abused in unimaginable ways. To compare the conditions of our people back then to what we're going through today, it's just dishonoring the ancestors, and it's a gross exaggeration. And I think that that's one of the problems with these black separatists. They rely on exaggerations to promote their agenda. You know, they talked about this problem of mass incarceration, and that's a problem that's been well documented in Michelle Alexander's masterpiece entitled The New Jim Crow. But to compare that situation to our current situation, to slavery, it's just a poor analogy. I mean, it's not the same type of condition. People were born into bondage. They spent their whole lives in bondage, based solely on the color of their skin, not based on them committing a crime or anything like that. Not somebody using their free will and committing a crime and then facing punishment for committing the crime. But they were enslaved against their will due to no fault of their own. Children were stripped and sold from their families. There's no comparison. And I just think that it is just inaccurate to compare the two. The problem of mass incarceration is a very real problem that has to be addressed. And that problem will not be addressed through rhetoric about separating from America. That problem will only be addressed by policy changes. That's the only way you address it, by changing government policy. And you do that by electing officials that are concerned about your issues. You do that through protest, through demonstration, by applying pressure on those who have power. So these are my thoughts about this issue. Tell me what you all think about this. And this may just be the first part to this discussion. I may have follow-ups, but I just want to be perfectly clear. I support the idea that Black people are a nation and that we should function like a nation. But I just think that we have current day problems that we have to address. And if we're to function like a nation, we should function like a nation where we live right now. Function like a nation by taking control over your community. Function like a nation by protecting your community from within and from without. From the criminals who are civilians and from the criminals who wear police uniforms. So those are my thoughts. Tell me what y'all think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.